Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast presented by BetMGM. This is the Group of Five Deep Dive. I'm Mike Calabrese, joined by my co-host Mike Iannello. This is part 2 in our G5 NFL draft coverage. So if you missed our first episode where we covered all the first and second round prospects in the upcoming drafts, please go back, listen to that one. Comment, rate, review, subscribe, everything you do on YouTube as well as your podcast feed really helps us out. But this is the episode where we're hitting on the sleepers, the diamonds in the rough, the true difference makers between good GMing and elite GMing. If you want to be somebody who leads your franchise to an NFL championship, getting that Super Bowl trophy, you need to crush rounds 3 all the way through the undrafted free agent portion of the post-draft process. So we're going to get into some of those guys. We're going to hear their names very early in round 3, all the way down to some of those camp invites that could be the last player to make an NFL roster, but that we're bullish on. So we're going to start with a player that I kicked out of the last episode, Michael Pratt from Tulane. I'm not a believer in him being a second-round NFL draft pick, but maybe you are, Iannello. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love Pratt. To me, I have Pratt QB7 in this draft. I think Williams may, I have that as tier 1, but if you want to throw Jaden Daniels in, fine. Williams, May, Daniels, that's clearly tier 1. I think they're going to go 1, 2, 3. Then I think there's a massive gap. And then you get into McCarthy, Nix, Penix in whatever order you want. And then I have Pratt right there after that. I have him at the top of tier 3. If you're going to try to tell me Spencer Rattler is ahead of Michael Pratt, you're insane. So to me, I have Pratt right there. And I think when you look at the way the NFL is, if you don't have, basically if you don't have Patrick Mahomes, you're screwed. But even if you want to say, if you don't have that Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar, Joe Burrow, like top 6 quarterback, top guy, franchise QB, you're screwed unless you're loaded everywhere else, unless you go Brock Purdy. To me, when you look at, that second tier, obviously, Chicago, Washington, New England should go May, Williams, Daniels. You look at who's projected, who needs a quarterback, Denver, Minnesota, Vegas. I'm telling you, I think those teams are better off taking Michael Pratt in round 3 than taking Bo Nix in round 1, because I don't think you're winning any more games with Bo Nix than you would with Michael Pratt. And you look at, let's take Vegas, for example. You can't tell me Michael Pratt's worse than Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew. Obviously, Minshew's played in the league for longer. But when you look at, who else would be in there? Are you going to take Bo? Is your team better because you have Bo Nix, or because you take, Rome Odunze and then you take Pratt, or you take Quinyon Mitchell, who we talked about, then you take Pratt? Like, dude, give me Mitchell in the first and Pratt in the third. You're going to win just as many games, if not more, than if you take Bo Nix. Bo Nix is not winning you a Super Bowl. Michael Penix is not winning you a Super Bowl. Could they be fine NFL starters? Sure. They're not beating Patrick Mahomes on Sunday, ever. Give me Pratt in round 3 or 4 and get better guys in the first round. When you look at Pratt, 4-year starter at Tulane, finished his career with 90 touchdowns, 26 interceptions, almost 10,000 passing yards. Obviously, when we talk about G5, we always have to throw the competition caveat. And Pratt's 4 years, actually, it was only over like a 3-year stretch, but he played 4 Power 5 teams. He was 2-2 against those teams, 2 outright wins with 8 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. The 4 teams he played were number 10 Oklahoma, number 11 Ole Miss, number 14 Kansas State, and number 12 USC. So it wasn't like he was playing Power 5. He was playing, Rutgers. Like, he played 4 top 15 teams and threw 8 touchdowns, 2 picks. When you watch him, he is just calm, cool in the pocket. He's accurate. He has great mechanics. He looks like an NFL type passer. He's a leader. His teammates love him. I'm going to throw all the cliches for him. Gamer, high football IQ, savvy, locker room guy, leads by examples. He's everything Spencer Rattler's not. So he doesn't have the strongest arm. Sure, that's his knock. He's a little slow through his progressions. Not the most athletic guy. He did rush for 28 touchdowns, so at least he had that somewhat in his bag. I wouldn't say he's not Josh Allen, but he can move. He's tough as nails. You said it last week that, I assume these NFL GMs aren't going to listen to me. They're going to take Michael Penix and Bo Nix, and they're going to suck. And I assume he's a backup. he's the guy where I think as soon as he enters the game, like he's not going to look rattled. He's not going to look nervous. He's going to look like he's been in the league for years. I think he should be, an NFL starter. And I think if he's a backup, he's one that I think will be a backup for a really long time in this league. So, like I said, I think you win more games with Michael Pratt in round 3 or round 4 than you do with Bo Nix in round 1.
All right, I have lots of things to say about this. Let's start with this. A little trivia time. You talked about him upsetting USC in that Cotton Bowl. How many passes did he complete in that game?
I'll tell you what, he ran for like 88 yards.
Oh, that's great. I mean, if this was like 1945 and he was running the wing T offense, let's talk about what he did passing the football against USC.
He threw 2 touchdowns. I'm not looking it up. He threw 2 touchdowns and no picks. I know he was like 8 for 17 or something like that, right?
8 for 17 is correct. 8 completions.
I swear to God, I don't have anything in front of me. I don't have his numbers in front of me.
Ding, ding, ding. Number 2, and this one's a big strike in my
How many touchdowns did he hand off to Tajay Spears?
Exactly. Tajay Spears, when he wasn't there, we'll talk about how he played last year, particularly against SMU with an opportunity to win back-to-back AAC titles. He plays up against an SMU defense that was 13th in pass defense. He grades out 62.2 according to PFF, completes just 58% of his passes, touchdown, interception. They score just 14 points in the loss. I think this kid is fine. I think he's going to be a backup quarterback. You don't take backup quarterbacks in the 3rd round of the NFL draft. If you said we get him in the 5th, I'm excited. I think he could be a long-term number 2 in the NFL. I think his arm is average, and there's very few quarterbacks, not just in the current era, really in the modern era of the NFL, very few quarterbacks with average arms that are plus starters. And you talk about like Gardner Minshew and those guys, like they're fine. They're stopgap starters. I think if you put Pratt in there, he could be a stopgap starter. He does have tools and traits that I think make him good enough to be on a roster and to probably make $15 million in his career. I mean, fingers crossed. I'm rooting for this kid. Go the Chase Daniel route. Just make like $40 million as a backup quarterback. It's incredible.
Like Josh McCown.
Yeah. But I think the reality is the best Tulane team, maybe in program history, it was built around Tajay Spears and explosive passing plays where it's like he would find somebody wide open. That Jackson kid was an absolute burner. They'd get into the open field and they'd score touchdowns. Pratt was someone who facilitated that. He gets credit for that. And the benefit is by doing all these things, he is going to get an opportunity in the NFL to at least secure a backup job. I think that's great. I think anything above the 3rd round is ridiculous. The fact that he's in this conversation to be a 2nd round pick, I wouldn't take him above a Penix Jr. You keep mentioning Bo Nix and Penix. I don't think those two guys belong in the same conversation at all because I think Bo Nix is not even a good backup potential in the NFL. I'm going to throw that out as my hottest take. I don't think he's anybody who should be hanging around for all that long. It should be the UFL, XFL, whatever they're calling it. He can go have a career there, Tommy Maddox style. But when it comes to Pratt, I would be hitting on my needs that are much higher on the board and the wish list than a backup.
Okay, so I agree with you in that sense where I would not take him in the 2nd round. I don't think when you just look at like his talent grade, where did Zappy go? 4th round? Yeah, I agree with you there. Do you agree with me on 2 things? One, it sounds like you do. Do you agree with me that you're going to win just as many games and you have just as much chance at winning a Super Bowl if you took Pratt later than on day 3 as you do if you take Penix or Nix round 1?
I think in a perfect scenario where Penix gets with the right offensive coordinator, with the right pieces around him, he could be a plus starter, like a fringe top 15 starter in the NFL. I think Nix does not have an NFL future whatsoever. Only in the exact right scenario for Penix would I advocate taking him in the late 2nd, early 3rd, and then trying to build around them. But yeah, I mean, all of this is just about draft capital. And I think to take any of those 3 guys early, I'm not into it.
All right. So here's another question. Because I think we can all agree, whether we agree or not, that's going to be the top 6.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed?
Yes.
Do you agree with me? Pratt's QB7.
Yes, I do.
Like you take him over Rattler and
yeah, I mean Rattler to me,
Hartman and who else is even in that? Yeah, okay.
Rattler, you can talk about the stuff between the ears and his leadership ability or lack thereof, and that starts to get a little bit soft and mushy where you don't really know. But the thing that concerns me the most about him is he took too many sacks. I understand the South Carolina offensive line sucked, but that's a good preparation for.
That concerns me about Rattler he's every time I hear him talk, he just is such a dick.
I mean, there's something to be said that a lot of great NFL quarterbacks were jerks, but you have to be great and you have to be able to handle the pressure and to be able to deliver. Like you look at some of the great all-time jerks in NFL history, like Brett Favre was not somebody who necessarily, I think, would win over a locker room if it wasn't for the fact that he could take a beating and stand in and make throws left and right. Like you have to be able to do that. And I don't necessarily say, we don't need to talk about Spencer Rattler any further. How about this? Let's jump position by position.
I was going to say quick. Friday night ends. Those 6 quarterbacks are off the board. Bet Pratt to be the next QB taken. All right.
Yeah, I think that's a good actionable point there.
Other G5, we're gonna try to give as many G5 guys love as possible. At least so if you listen to our pod forever, you know the names. If you don't, when you hear the name, like, oh, they mentioned that guy. Do you have any thoughts or any notes on the other G5 QBs who probably see their names called? Austin Reed, Western Kentucky, Carter Bradley, South Alabama, Gavin Hardison, UTEP. Any thoughts on those 3? Is there anybody else you think gets drafted, or do you have any thoughts on those guys? If you had to pick one, kind of who would you take for those 3?
I think there's a chance in the right system, Austin Reed hangs around the NFL a little bit. He had, if you look at some of the splits in situational football, he was great in the red zone. He did a really good job. I think he only took 1 sack in his whole career at Western in the red zone. Very efficient there. It was also an offense that you put so much on tape. You're throwing into so many different coverages. You're playing, in a lot of cases, from behind because their defense wasn't all that great. So the fact that Bailey Zappi can be a backup quarterback in the NFL out of that pseudo system, I know that it's changed a little bit since Zappi moved on to the NFL. I think there's a chance for him to be, let's call it a 6th, 7th round pick and to maybe beat out a veteran who's more expensive in camp and become an NFL backup. The other 2 guys hard pass on the UTEP quarterback as well as Carter Bradley from South Alabama. I think even though the Sun Belt is one of our favorite, it's lots of good defense, lots of good personnel that move on to the NFL level. I just don't see him being somebody who's going to translate to the NFL level and all of a sudden play at a higher level than he did at the college.
See, if I take a backup, I'm taking Bradley. This might sound like an old man take, but hey, Austin Reed gets a fancy red Corvette and his production drops. That's red flag city to me. I'm taking Bradley strictly because neither one of these guys has NFL talent. But Bradley's dad was an NFL coach for like 20 years. He's been around the game since like he was born. Really high football IQ. If I'm having a guy holding a clipboard, I want the guy whose dad was an NFL coach for years. So
it sounds like he should be a coach. Why don't he just pick up a GA job, get into the pipipeline a little bit?
He's my QB3 practice squad guy. Hold the clipboard, and I want him scouting the other team. So give me him. All right, running back. If you had to pick a G5 back, are you going Rasheen Ali from Marshall, Blake Watson from Memphis, Kamani Vidal from Troy, George Holani, Boise State, or Frank Gore Jr., Southern Miss?
This one's super easy to me. It's Rasheen Ali all day, every day, twice on Sunday, which is appropriate because that's where he's going to be playing. Listen, if you go back to Bruce Feldman's freak list, he ranked number 96, and he wrote this about Rasheen Ali. The 6', 211 pounder from Ohio, vertical jumped 36 inches in the offseason, broad jump 10 feet, also power clean 335 and squatted 500 pounds. The kid's a monster in the weight room. He's got the ability to break tackles. He's got wiggle. When he got to the second level, you saw him run away from a lot of players, particularly when he was fully healthy with a better offensive line in 2021. He was an all-American style, player in terms of his production, the way he looked. You just flipped on the games like that New Orleans Bowl. It's like, why is this guy playing at Marshall? His numbers were bananas in 2021. 24 total TDs, 46 receptions. People that are a lot smarter than me that live and die with the tape say that he can pick up blitz packages and he can protect his quarterback. That's awfully important to becoming a 3-down back, which I think is what he's going to be in the NFL. Last year, his offensive line was awful. We talked about this Marshall team. They were a mess at quarterback. They were a mess on the offensive line. He still got in the end zone 16 times with over 5 yards per carry. In a lot of cases, he had to break a tackle at the line of scrimmage just to get any positive yardage. So I think he's the complete package. It's rare at the G5 level to have a guy who doesn't have any appreciable weaknesses. Yes, it'd be great if he was a little bit faster, a tenth of a second in the 40, had more quote unquote home run potential. He still had a lot of long runs and long receptions in college for somebody who struggled in that department.
He led the country with plays of 50 plus yards.
Yes. So to me, I think it's Rasheen Ali, pretty clearly. I don't think anyone else is in his tier. I think every other player that you listed, a lot of them were super productive in college. Some of that was system fit. Some of it was the competition they were facing, but a lot of them have either physical limitations or some issues in terms of being complete players. So that's my big headline here. He is a complete player. He's ready. If an NFL starter got hurt, I think he'll be drafted and ideally put into, an RB2 situation. If somebody gets hurt, he's someone who could win you your fantasy league by showing up out of nowhere and running for 1,000 yards and scoring 10 touchdowns in the NFL.
Yeah, I love Ali. The knocks, I will say, just to play devil's advocate, he did fumble a lot, and the injuries. He missed all of 2022 basically with injury. He missed a game last year. Then he got hurt again. He hurt his ankle at the end of last year. Then he tore his bicep before the Senior Bowl. So he's not even healthy now. So he's had 3 different injuries in the last 2 years. So that concerns me. Well, I agree with you. Ali's the first G5 back off the board. I love Blake Watson. And you mentioned, their system plays. The system's why I love Blake Watson. Darrell Henderson, Tony Pollard, Antonio Gibson, Kenneth Gainwell. Memphis has just printed NFL running backs. And I think Watson he fits today's NFL perfectly. Last year, his first year at Memphis, 1,100 yards rushing with 14 touchdowns on the ground, 53 catches, 3 receiving touchdowns. He averaged 6 yards per carry and 9 yards per reception. He was a wide receiver in high school. He has elite hands. I think he's the perfect third down, but he does need to get better as a pass blocker. But you mentioned the guys I just named, Antonio Gibson, Kenneth Gainwell. To me, he is going to have that exact career in the NFL. You take him in round 6, I think he is a perfect complementary third down back. I love Blake Watson.
And I think it's nice too, having covered his entire career. I think his entire career fell into our podcast footprint here. Started at Old Dominion. You want to see somebody move from smaller G5 football up to, the quote unquote Power 6 in the AAC. He got to Memphis and he played even better. I mean, a part of that's the system and giving him the opportunity, but in terms of workload, he had more touches. He was the focal point of the offense and he delivered. So I'm with you on this guy. I think his overall size obviously hurts him a little bit in terms of where he gets drafted because it's very difficult to envision him being a bell cow back in the NFL, a feature back. But there's always spots for Kenny Gainwells in the NFL with so much happening out of the backfield. And it's been this renaissance. I heard something recently. It was a conversation, I believe, on the NFL Network, and they were talking, was Reggie Bush, born at the wrong time, put into the wrong version of the NFL? At the very beginning of his career, he had tons of receptions. I think he had 88 one year with the Saints, but he never really got used in that same way for the rest of his career. Where a guy like Watson comes in, almost every team has weeks where they'll target a running back 7 or 8 times out of the backfield. So he's somebody who could move into that, get 15 snaps per game and still be on an NFL radar and play well enough to earn his keep and to get to his second contract. So I like Blake Watson a lot there.
All right. Real quick, too, I just want to mention Kamani Vidal from Troy. He was second in the nation with over
too small, I think. Right? Okay, I mean, he's what, 5'7"?
But he's all muscle, dude. He was tied with Ollie Gordon he had over 1,000 yards after contact, 94 missed tackles. And then if you do want a 7th round pick, a little cheat code for you, pick Frank Gore because dude plays quarterback, wide receiver, running back, kick returner. He'll bring his auntie. He was 12th in the country in yards after contact, led Southern Miss in every category for 4 straight years. He's basically drafting 4, back of the roster guys. He's the perfect scout team player because he can just play any position. So
I mean, what's the line from the Friday Night Light movie? He'll fill up the water bottle, he'll walk the dog, he'll paint your back porch. The guy does everything. So
he can pass.
And he can pass.
All right, wide receiver. I will say compared to last year, super thin. Last year we talked about Nakua, we talked about Dell, we talked about Rice. On our last pod, we talked about Malachi Corley. But after that, oh boy, I only have 3 guys written down that could potentially get drafted. Jaquan Jackson from Tulane, Luke McCaffrey from Rice, Joshua Cephas from UTSA. First, Is there anybody else you think could hear their name called? And if not, of those three guys, anybody you want to talk about?
I mean, there's always a potential for a sneaky under the radar guy to come up from the FCS ranks, but we're not going to talk about that. So let's just
Right
stick with the guys you mentioned. My player in this grouping is McCaffrey. He tested really well. He's 87th percentile on the 3-cone drill.
Right. You just think of the last name's McCaffrey.
I mean, listen, his measurables are matching up with his lineage because 91st percentile on the shuttle to former quarterback. I really like it when players switch positions because I think it hides a little bit of their value in the learning curve. He got better and better moving from quarterback to receiver in his time at Rice. And another thing that's also interesting to me, at least from a receiver perspective, when your quarterbacks stink or when there's no continuity and you still put up good numbers, that impresses me. He caught passes from 6 different Rice quarterbacks in the past 2 years. He knows how to be a pro clearly from his family history. He clearly put in the work to get better and did it at a place where there wasn't much limelight. I think he started his career at Nebraska as a quarterback. He had an opportunity to maybe stay at a bigger name program. He wanted to play and he wanted to give it an honest go at wide receiver. He has the physicality. He has the numbers. I think this could be a real steal for somebody. And I know sometimes it smacks a bit of nepotism or it's just the name. No one's comparing him to Christian. No one thinks he's going to come in and be an all-pro guy. But I think in a current NFL where you need 3 good receivers, there's no reason why he can't work his way into that 3rd wide receiver slot for a lot of teams in the NFL. So he's my pick of this group, although Jackson's speed is so enticing. Like if we just list off some of his splits and his 40-yard dash time, you say that 3 times, the ghost Al Davis is going to come out and listen to this podcast. But like he's somebody that a team will fall in love with the ability to stretch the field in 4 or 5 wide receiver sets. That's still valuable to take the top off of the defense.
Yeah, I think Jackson, as fast as he is, he really didn't put up like crazy numbers at Tulane, and he had Pratt. To me, McCaffrey's a no-brainer. And I think the fact that, when you get to these round 5 through 7 and the guys fighting and clawing and make the team, the guy that everyone's calling, the Nepo baby, give me that chip on his shoulder. You mentioned it. You saw him have to drop down from Nebraska. He had to switch positions, and all he did was lead the American in touchdown catches. Freaky athletic. He's second in the country in contested catches last season.
That's all the NFL is. Like when you think about Sundays, like unless you're a Tyreek Hill, unless you're a super elite route runner or have crazy speed, you don't get wide open looks. You got to go take the ball away from somebody.
I think too is like he's not the small, shifty Julian Edelman white receiver. Like search on Twitter, Luke McCaffrey one-handed catch. This dude was one-handed mossing dudes in the end zone last year. Like I think he absolutely is a home run in this kind of range for a guy that you just know is going to work his bag off to make the team and get, I'm sure he's got a massive chip on his shoulder being the less talented brother. So yeah, give me Luke McCaffrey all day. All right. Tight end, Dallin Holker, Colorado State. Any thoughts?
I mean, I like the guy. I think it's funny that when people talk about the position in general, I saw like 2 or 3 comments where, he doesn't have the speed to stretch the field. And then they just start listing off some of the greatest tight ends in NFL history. It's like, no one thinks he's going to be Gronk. No one thinks he's going to be, Travis Kelce. Like, that's fine. You can be a really good number 2, borderline number 1 receiver because he's physical at the point of attack. He can block. And when he gets the ball, he's a pretty good runner once he gets up to full speed. You saw him really do some damage in the second level. Granted, it was the Mountain West, but he had a really nice season. And as long as he stays healthy, and that's the big issue on him. He had, a lost season at BYU due to injury. He's also older because he went on his Mormon mission. I think these are realistic dings. I think this moves him down teams' draft boards. But when I watch him play, I'm like, that's an NFL tight end for sure. I think he's, if you told me in 2 years trying to set my lineup for my fantasy team, he's in that just outside the top 10 of tight ends. That makes sense to me, given his ball skills and his ability for running after the catch. So I like the guy a lot. I'm happy to see him succeed. We talked about him a ton in the preseason series, talking about Colorado State being a sleeper in the Mountain West. He was a reason why he lived up to the hype. Their quarterback situation, again, we just talked about McCaffrey catching passes from different quarterbacks, issues at that position group. He was still able to produce, even though they were playing musical chairs. They had a freshman in there. They had, a guy who didn't have experience. He was the safety blanket. I think he got close to 700 yards for the Rams last year. So yeah, I'm in on Hoker.
Yeah, I think that's something weird about Hoker. I agree. He had a great year. Third among all tight ends and forced missed tackles last year. thing that's weird is he has that weird combo. He really didn't do anything at BYU. So he has that weird combo of like one season of real breakout production at Colorado State, but you can't even say like he's super raw because, like you said, he's 24 years old because he had like 2 years of like religious mission trips. So it's like he's like raw but like old. So it's kind of a weird thing. All right. Any offensive linemen you want to talk about? Nathan Thomas, Louisiana, Ethan Driscoll, Marshall, Frank Crum, Wyoming. Care? Anything you want to mention?
I like Frank Crum. I like any Wyoming tough. You think
That's
about all
me.
their teams just in
Can't tell you
the
like about blocking, but just Wyoming, go for him. Take him.
yeah. I also think there's a certain element of like culture where they talk about some of the guys at the very top, particularly at the tackle position. Sometimes these guys are like dancing bears. They have such great athleticism and they're more in the pass protection scheme. I sometimes want to add into the mix, whether it's just you're too deep, a guy who's a road grader, who is a bully, who comes in maybe a half second after the whistle blows and knocks over a defensive back off the pile. Like those are Wyoming guys. So that's just my thought on it. We don't have to get into it. We don't, claim to be the Cole Kublix of the world, breaking down all the different
Tom
elements
Fornelli.
and the schemes and all those kind of things. But when it comes to culture fits, I wouldn't mind having a Wyoming offensive lineman in my locker room.
Agreed. All right. Switching over to defense. When you look at the edge rushers, if you listen to our part one podcast, everything we said about Marshall Nealand, Mohamed Kamara is the exact opposite. This dude is all production. 13 sacks, 17 tackles for loss last year. Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year. This dude's a lunatic. When you watch him play, he's one of those guys where like when you watch, you're like, that dude is nuts. Like you notice him on defense. Crazy energy. He launches off the line of scrimmage as soon as he is relentless. Everything you read about him from his teammates, his coaches, just no nonsense player, super intense work ethic. But compared to Nealand, he's undersized. He's fast, but he's small. He's not as long, but he plays with crazy intensity. And I'm telling you, give me this dude on my team every day of the week. I don't care how big he is. I don't care how long he is. Give me the dude that I know when the ball snapped, he's going to try to kill the other team's quarterback or die trying. I love Mohamed Kamara.
I am with you. I couldn't be more in lockstep on this one. And what's interesting, having watched a ton of Colorado State football really the last 2 years, he was the best defender they had. So you know that every single team was game planning against him. And he's like, I don't care. I'm still going to be the defensive player of the year in this conference. He finished second in career sacks at Colorado State with 30 and a half, third in career tackles for loss with almost 46. To me, he's very similar to Shaq Barrett, another Colorado State product who became an NFL Pro Bowler. And like Barrett, he moved from linebacker to edge. And once he did that, he still remains undersized, but he flourished in that role. And I think he really made himself rich by his measurables. His 10-yard split, 1.58, elite 40-yard dash, 4.58. That is going to make him a very high third-round pick, if not a second-round pick. You mentioned it in our first episode. Depending on how the dominoes fall in the first round and when those edge rushers go, if there's a run on them in the top 20, I think teams are going to start getting desperate because if you don't have a Patrick Mahomes, as we started this episode talking about, you got to get to a Patrick Mahomes. You got to hurt these guys. You got to make life miserable for them, and you can never have too many pass rushers. So for that reason, I think he's going to be a very early third-round pick.
The thing with Kamara too, and like this is a crazy comparison. Obviously, he's not close to that talent level. He's the closest thing I've ever noticed, at least me recently, with Micah Parsons, where when I watch Colorado State, when they're on defense, I'm watching Kamara and just like, is he going to get there this time? And like Parsons, you always know where Parsons is. Like even when he doesn't get a sack, you just like see him fly across your screen and like either get double teamed or swing and miss, or the quarterback has to step up to avoid him. Where that every single snap is determined based on where Kamara is. Like they have to game plan against him, and it's basically like he's either going to screw up the whole play, or are they going to be able to block? Like you just watch him every play. I love watching him play. The other edge rushers that probably go Eric Watts, UConn, and Javon Solomon from Troy. I like Troy a lot, or Solomon a lot from Troy. He's another guy he's just undersized, but
I mean, I can talk about him really fast. He is
Yeah, go for
undersized,
it.
but he's fast, he's twitchy. for that reason, I think he's probably going to fall to the fifth round because of his overall length and
I like
size.
when I'm reading like NFL draft like analysis, there's nothing I love more than hearing smooth hips. Oh, but Solomon got them smooth hips.
He certainly has those smooth hips. It allowed him to lead the country in sacks. I think he can do a lot worse than adding the leader in sacks to your roster. He had 16 last year, three-time All Sun Belt team over the course of his career. Honorable mention All American once. I watched him a ton because I loved Carlton Marshall on that defense a couple of years ago, but he actually stood out more in terms of just wrecking plays in the passing game. And in his career, he had sacks against K-State and South Carolina, so he wasn't out of his element when they played some of the best teams on their schedule. So he's somebody that I think you can get at a discount because of his physical limitations, but if you get him in the fifth round, I think there's no reason to think that he couldn't add, let's call it 3, 4, 5 sacks as a situational pass rusher by, the first couple of years of his career.
Yep, I completely agree. All right, for linebackers, we got Jordan McGee from Temple, Tyrese Knight from UTEP, Easton Gibbs from Wyoming, John Tree Hunter from Georgia State, Dallas Gant from Toledo, and Jackson Mitchell from UConn. Those are the linebackers I expect to hear called. Two guys I just want to quickly say, we mentioned the Wyoming thing, copy paste Easton Gibbs, just tackling machine, smaller guy, so he's going to fall, but just works his bag off. He's a guy I'd love to have in the 6th, 7th round. And then we mentioned it for Christian Haynes. Jackson Mitchell is the guy I think really got hurt from coming back. I think he's probably firmly a day 3 draft pick if he came out of the draft last year for UConn. Now he's probably that fringe round 7 UFA guy, but he just did everything for that UConn defense. And yeah, I really wish he entered the draft last year after that 140 tackle season. Do you have any thoughts on those 6 guys?
I like Jackson Mitchell. I still do. The guy played through injury. Like it wasn't even hard to see. Like he had the huge cast on his arm, and like that to me shows toughness because in the NIL era, oh, like I'm not getting, enough endorsements or like, oh, I could play at a better program and immediately any opportunity transferring. This guy was stuck at UConn after a huge breakout season, by the way. He could have gone anywhere.
Yeah.
Comes back, buys into it. Things just didn't go the Huskies' way last year. We don't have to belabor that point. But I think it's a bit of an overreaction to say all of a sudden, oh, they don't have guys who can play in the NFL. We talked about Haynes in the first episode. I think Mitchell's somebody who can be a rotational guy in the NFL. Those tackling machines, making sure that those 5-yard runs don't turn into 25-yard runs. I know that linebacker has become almost the mirror image of the running back position on offense, where it's like, we don't value this position anymore. We don't pay these guys a lot of money. They're not as impactful as they were in the 90s. That's true, but you still got to have guys who are reliable. And it's a position group that if you don't have depth or you don't have quality starters, you can be taken advantage of in a serious way. I think he can be somebody who can be a value add, in the 6th or 7th round. I hope he gets drafted because I think he's someone who's proven at least, 2 years ago that he's an absolute missile to the football. He is very quick diagnosing plays, and he's a sure tackler. And he's also someone who's disruptive. He can force fumbles and get into the backfield as well. So I'm hoping
led the country in fumbles recovered the year before last year. All right, secondary. The only safety I had written down was Trey Taylor from Air Force, and then cornerback was weird because it was all over the map. Like every site you looked for prospects, like there was probably 5 or 6 G5 corners that were listed, but every site had a different like 3 or 4 guys. So I didn't want to just write like every name. The 3 big ones that I saw pretty much on every list were Chiganuzium from Colorado State, Carlton Johnson from Fresno State, and Micah Abraham from Marshall. There's a few other guys that, potentially fall into that list. Are there any guys, corners, safeties that you were interested in? The one I'll talk about of the guys I just named is Micah Abraham, because he's the guy, like I said, that I know we've talked about on the pod a lot. He was so good at Marshall, 55 passes defended and 12 picks during his Marshall career, led the Sun Belt in interceptions over the last 2 years, ball hawk. And then just a quick rant on the state of, Pro Bowl, NFL draft, pro day, combine stuff. I was reading his, profile on NFL.com, and this sentence made me so angry. Looks twitchier on tape than he did at his pro day. Okay, so then he's twitchy. Like, I don't give a shit what he did at his pro day. If when he's playing football, he's fast and twitchy, then he's fast and twitchy. We saw with Kyle Hamilton in his 40-yard time. It's like if you watch him at Notre Dame, he was fast. And then you see him with the Ravens, and now he's fast and like he's awesome and he's sick. We mentioned it last year with Puka Nacua. Like, watch him with the football. He runs fast. Same with Mike Abraham. When you watch him play, he's twitchy, he's fast. I don't care what he does at his pro day. When he's playing football, he's twitchy. So draft him to play football. So that's my rant. I like Micah Abraham of kind of those G5 corners. Anybody I listed or anybody else you want to talk about that you kind of like coming out of the G5 secondary?
Well, first, I think there's a lot to be said, particularly when you get to the mental aspect of the NFL. There's paralysis through analysis, where if you don't know exactly the scheme or where you're supposed to be or where players are going to be when you're playing in zone, when you're, passing people off in coverage, you can play slower. And it can also go the opposite way, where yes, a guy may have 0.2 of a second faster on a 40-yard dash, but if he doesn't know where he's supposed to be or have that feel, for lack of a better word, that he can play slower. Like we've seen it play out. So I do think it's a good point. When you talk about the secondary, there's just one guy that I was thrilled to research for this piece, and it's Trey Taylor out of Air Force. First of all,
I knew you. I literally wrote him down because I knew you wanted to talk about him.
All right. I mean, the guy is a dog. You watch that meme. It's like, you go through the whole roster, dog. This guy's a dog. He's Ed Reed's cousin. He won the Thorpe Award last year, which is increasingly rare for a G5 player to win a national award. Taylor is the first ever Thorpe Award winner recipient from Air Force and only the second Falcon to win a major college football award, joining Chad Hennings, who won the 1987 Outland Trophy before contributing to the Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl teams. You'll get his PFF grade, 82.6. You'll get his RAS score, 9.33 out of 10, 22 bench reps at 225, 22, which is incredible for a player out of the secondary. Great vertical, great shuffle, 3-cone time. The guy's a stud. And he's also a proven leader. At the very least, I know he's going to come in and work his ass off, because when you look at all of his accomplishments on the field, he was also honored by the Falcons as the Defender of the Nation Award, which is an award given to a college football player from one of the nation's service academies based on exceptional leadership qualities, performance on and off the field, and a high standard of integrity. I understand that the NFL, you want to stock your team with the best players possible, but it doesn't hurt getting a first-class human being who also is an incredible athlete to get in your locker room, because he can do it all. He was a tremendous tackler. If you look at his highlight reels that are making the rounds on social media, he flew in. Like when he walked down to the box, like running backs had to be on notice because he was throwing kids around like rag dolls. And he went and got the football. There wasn't a whole lot of opportunities when teams were throwing at him, but when they did, he took it away. And the last piece of it is, I don't know if you're in on this news, but as it sits, this is going to be the last year that the U.S. government will permit service academy players, those at Army, Navy, Air Force, to jump directly to college or jump directly to the NFL from college. Next year, athletes will be required to serve 2 years in the military, which had been, kind of the long established rule until 2019. So they had this window in which they could make the quick jump. This is the last time he's going to be the last player to do it. As somebody who loves the position of safety because it's so versatile, some of my favorite players in college and the pros played the position. This guy, the fact that they're having him mocked like later in the NFL draft is bananas to me. He is somebody that all you had to do, we mentioned it with Kamara, there was a couple of Mountain West guys. There were some players who are like, one of these things are not like the other. You only had to watch 5 or 6 snaps and you're like, what is this guy doing at Air Force? Because he was an absolute missile to the football. And for that reason, when you pair it with all the measurables, there's no reason, in my opinion, not to take him in the 2nd or 3rd round. But apparently everywhere he's getting mocked, it's interesting. I mentioned on the previous podcast, there's like aggregators of all of the mock drafts around the internet. Right now, his average pick is 251st. His best in the entire process was 106th, which still puts him, not in that 1st or 2nd round conversation, even close. You cannot convince me there are 250 college football players better than this kid. I would take him as the 2nd or 3rd best safety in this entire class. And as I mentioned, world-class human being, great plus to the locker room. I want this guy on my team.
Hey, that's a guy you want to go to war with. Literally.
Yeah, quite literally.
All right, that's all I got.
All right, so we have covered it all from Quinyon Mitchell, ideally being the very first G5 player and first cornerback. Hopefully it cashes my ticket there. Minus 150. Fingers crossed for Quinyon, the Toledo product, to be the first corner off the board. I think he will be, all the way down to the last pick in the 7th round, as well as some undrafted free agents. I do think there's going to be some more defensive players that are going to be impactful in this draft than necessarily the offensive side, as we saw last year from G5 land. But that's no reason to throw any cold water on it. Any final thoughts about this draft class, top to bottom?
No, I think this is, this one isn't as bettable as, most of our pods typically are. I think hopefully you guys use what we say here. I mean, it's harder this year. It's not many like receivers, but if you're someone who plays Dynasty Fantasy, like I said, we nailed it last year. The first thing I did when my Dynasty draft ended was pick up Puka Nacua for free. And he's he's like a top 15 receiver. So, Rasheen Ali, Blake Watson, Malachi Corley, like these are guys I would be targeting in your Dynasty leagues. If you want to take a flyer on Luke McCaffrey for free, he'll make an NFL team. So hopefully you can take some of what we said and make it somewhat actionable when it comes to at least Dynasty leagues.
For Mike Iannello, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the BBOC podcast presented by BetMGM. Our Group of 5 deep dive now in the book, our 2-part NFL draft series complete, but we have more content right around the corner. So next week, I'll be back here in the seat with Colin Wilson talking about college baseball and the lead up to the College World Series, the Super Regionals, all that fun, all the way to Omaha, building all of your futures, hopefully getting you to the tournament with 5 or 6 teams. And as I mentioned in the last episode, really great payouts. It's very rare for a top team or a top 2 team to win the College World Series. Some crazy things happen out in Omaha. So it's fun to have some 15, 20, 25 to 1 tickets. Colin will walk you through everything with his power rankings. The guy is so in tune with what's going on the diamond in college baseball. He goes, genius level doesn't even begin to scrape the surface. He's talking about wind at different stadiums. He's talking about deep pitching rotations, understanding these managers having watched and covered college baseball for so many years. He understands the strengths and weaknesses that's taking place in the dugout as well. So I'm basically going to play the de facto audience member, pick his brain, and I think we're all beneficiaries of it. Last year, we ended up with a ticket on LSU to win the national championship. Hopefully, we hand out another winner this time around. So that'll be the end of next week. We'll call it 26th or 27th of April. So be sure to check out your podcast feeds. And it's always really, really helpful to us if you can go ahead and rate and review both on YouTube as well as social media and on your podcast where you can give out 5-star reviews. We'll be sure to throw out some free swag, some merchandise. And you know what? I'm going to throw my hat in the ring here. Whoever writes the best review of this episode, I'm happy to give you a free $10 future on the College Diamond to win the national championship. So please fire in some 5-star reviews. As Stuck likes to say, you can write whatever you want. It's just got to be 5 stars. So please rate and review. Tell a friend, tell an enemy. You know how we do here on the Big Bets on Campus podcast. Thanks again for listening and enjoy the NFL draft.